today. We will get started, and thank you again for joining us here on addressing learning differences through remote learning. The more we've been in touch with teachers and administrators across the state and across the country, this topic seems to be one that again and again keeps coming up, and people are definitely really wanting to dive into and trying to figure out. And I feel like it's a work in progress every single day and will continue to be, but we're hoping today that we can share with you some of the things that we've done and that we're seeing work in certain places, and that we can build upon those ideas. So thank you so much for being here with us once again. We really do strive for this to be an interactive session. You'll note we use the chat option a lot, but also if there's something you want to share, please don't hesitate to pause. We will take turns. There's several of us, and so I'm really pleased today. This is part of our remote learning support that we've been able to provide in partnership with the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. And I know we have a couple of people here as well from DPI. They started working a few weeks ago. We've been working with them obviously for a long time, but we joined efforts a couple weeks ago to say, what are some of the sessions that we're hearing are really needed in the field? And so building on our joint areas of experience, we've been putting these together. And so we're delighted to be able to share this with you today. I mentioned that I'm Mary Ann, but I'm also really pleased to be joined by Mark Sandberg and Alex Dreyer today. And Brittany Miller will also be on here at some point, but really was part of developing this series for you as well. And so we've done work for many, many years around learning differences specifically, but also around how do you meet the needs of students using digital learning. And so kind of marrying those two worlds, we're very pleased today to share with us some of the work we've been able to do together. We are part of the Friday Institute, which is at NC State University, and specifically several of us are on the Professional Learning and Leading Collaborative. So many of you are familiar, and I've seen you and your names before, but for those of you who don't know, we are where research, practice, and policy come together, and we do have the opportunity to work with schools and districts in North Carolina, but also across the country and even the world every day, so we're very excited. A great question just popped up. We will be recording this session today, and it looks like Alex has already started that. So you will be able to find this and all the resources. The next slide actually shares with you that link. And so thank you for prompting that. We have our slides, our recordings, and also the opportunities for future sessions available at go.ncsu.edu/remote learning. And so we will make sure that you have options to access that very, very quickly. Oh, Mark just added that for you there, but also into the future. So thank you very much for joining us, and feel free to access that now or later on. It will continue to be available. It seems like many of you may now be delving into and using Zoom on a regular basis. But just as a quick reminder, you can mute and unmute as needed. Sometimes we'll go ahead and mute across the board if we hear some background noise, but it seems like we're in good shape today. You also have an opportunity to join the chat. So that's something I want to make sure that we point out to you. And also if you want to exit or enter full screen, that's another option that sometimes people are looking for. So don't hesitate to use the chat, and you can message us directly or everyone, and just let us know if you have any questions or challenges as we go through the day today. This is for you, and we want to make sure we can meet the needs as much as possible and take questions, but also if we don't know the answer, we can go and try and find out some more ideas and get back to you as well. So starting with, we'd actually like to hear directly from you. And so this next question is, which movie title best describes how you're feeling about virtual or remote learning right now? So I think Alex is going to launch a poll and give you a chance to vote on which one do you feel is the most relevant to you right now. And we seem to have across the board many different, but nobody's really, one person is Ferris Bueller's Day Off. So it
This
seems
is
like,
Marianne, this is for you. Hi, everyone. This is Alex Dreyer. This is very interesting. We've done this poll a few times, and we actually historically have had one that's been fairly dominant, but not in this group. We've got a pretty interesting,
yeah.
close race.
Yeah, I was really feeling a connection with people saying Fast and Furious, Alex. So
Yes.
that's where
Now we're
I
gonna influence the poll here, but I think
uh,
that is true. There is definitely some Fast and Furious going on. Maybe
yeah, and
it'll be
Nicole
interesting
has
if
a great recommendation to add Groundhog Day to this. Those
that's
of us
really
in
true.
many weeks are certainly appreciating that as well. Okay,
I
we have a
love
few
that.
votes for Groundhog Day.
The next time we put this poll up, there will be a Groundhog Day option. Noted. Noted.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Well, it's really helpful for us to hear where you are. I'm impressed with a lot of you really do feel like you're working, you're moving along, but clearly we'll keep trying to support this. So what
You
is
can
the
see.
general overwhelming response, Alex, that you've been seeing?
I've been seeing Fast and Furious for sure,
Okay.
and there's definitely been Clueless, Fast and Furious. I would say on my personal front, it's Frozen. Only insofar as I hear those songs, 25 hours a day, 8 days a week, from my 7-year-old daughter. And for those of you with young children as well, maybe you do hear other movie soundtracks carrying out throughout your day, but that's something I'm definitely hearing.
That's great. Well, thank you. And I don't know why in my college age, high school and middle school, we all managed to watch Aladdin the other night. So I think we all are having some of those songs in our minds, no matter how old our kids are right now. So, but thank you, Alex. I think, yeah. So to jump in, we did want to share with you a framework that we've been working with DPI on to really help us think about and Alex, let me see. I guess that poll just goes away. There we go. To help us really think about as you're designing learning opportunities in this remote setting, what should you be thinking about? And today we will dive into some of these areas, but I think sometimes it's helpful to take that deep breath and remember that we're not trying to match minute to minute every single thing we do when we're in the classroom. Like for a whole structured day, right? Like we have to be realistic about what families and students are experiencing and really think through. I know in terms of learning differences, there's some special exceptions to that where we really do need to be looking at that. But we wanted to share with you this broader framework around connection to families and students and how important that is, the idea of student engagement and where it aligns to standards, the importance, and I think in particular this webinar on equity, choice, and flexibility, but also how do you provide feedback on student work when still being reasonable, knowing that some students have access to technology, some don't, some may need different kinds of feedback than what we would imagine being able to do. How can we encourage collaboration among students? And then certainly, last but not least, is social and emotional learning. And that at the end of the day, we know that that is such a strong foundation that really often allows learning to take place. And so how can we make sure we're thinking about that? And so that kind of sets a broad focus for us as we go into today's focus on how do we support our students with learning differences. And for us, that means supporting all learners. And we will get specific and we're really happy to engage with you. But we just heard so much about this topic being needed. And so we'll be really eager to see what ideas and suggestions are helpful, but also how can we draw from you on what you're doing and what's working. And so with that, Alex, I'm going to turn it over to you to dive into our focus for today.
Sure. So our focus for today, we're going to tackle this in 3 parts. We're going to first talk and define specific terms, what are learning differences, what do we mean by learning differences. We're going to explore some different strategies in the student engagement side and specifically as related to learning differences themselves. And finally, we're going to talk about how to connect with families and students. So on that first front, I'll be tackling this idea of how do we define learning differences. And we'll talk more deeply again, as I said, about strategies. But one of the things when we think about learning differences themselves is that, so research shows as shown in a variety of ways, in a variety of different ways, that all students vary to some degree in how they learn, but we don't have environments right now, by and large, that are structured to support this type of variability. So I think the big question is, and with something we've been tackling as a team for about almost going on 6 years now, is how can we help educators and students figure out how to address this gap, to create learning environments that are structured to support all students. Not only that, then you step up and think, how can we address this gap at a distance? And then it's not like, I think the thing really to think about, at least the thing that I think about, and I think it's been helpful for others, is that we're not only just, it would be hard enough as it is just to say, all right, tomorrow you guys were all supporting this at a distance. Well, without any preparation, with a ton of preparations, if we were completely prepared, if we had a huge, intricate rollout strategy that was developed over the course of multiple years, that would still be hard, right? But then you add on top of that, we're doing it quickly. We're engaged in some fast and furious thinking in this area. And then at the same time, we're doing it during a global pandemic, and we can't lose sight of that. So you have that combination of, we're doing it super fast with a lack of overall preparation and during a very, very stressful time. So it's important that I think we all recognize that this isn't normal, and we're just going to do the best we can throughout this. And so when we go through some of these strategies, it's in that spirit. It's this idea of, here's some things we can do that potentially can help you push the ball forward a little bit, that aren't too intricate and crazy, that are doable. And that was the mindset that we took into this. How can we help figure out how we can push the ball forward in addressing all learners at a distance with equity in mind, making sure that the gap with which those who have access to technology and resources and those who have less access isn't exacerbated during this period, because you run the risk of that. So those are some of the challenges we're wrestling with, and that's what we're gonna try to tackle in this session. So. How we define learning differences, it's a number, there are a variety of ways. We want to, if you take anything away from the way that we're thinking about it, is that it's a more inclusive, encompassing term than something like learning disabilities. So it's not, we don't mean it as a sort of politically correct way of referring to students with learning disabilities. Students with learning disabilities certainly have many learning differences, and you'll see examples of that. But learning differences can mean stuff like a student might have a challenge with working memory. They might have a challenge with motivation. And these are types of things that I know lots of students, myself included, certainly struggled with in school at times. And I wasn't diagnosed with a specific learning disability. So we want to be clear that it's an encompassing term that we want to figure out, because every student varies to some degree in how they learn. How are we able to create a learning context to meet those needs? And we'll start with a video of a student with whom he was part of a project, a student, he's now, probably he's out of college now, but he was in college at the time. It's an advocacy group around supporting students who had learning differences and who continue to have learning differences, partnering and sharing their story with students who are currently in the K-12 system, and describing what it was like for them and what their experiences were like, and what they're currently like now, and how some of the challenges that they experience help shape them. So I'm going to share this video with you all, and please give me a thumbs down if you can't hear anything, but I think we got this pretty decent here. I'm going to share the computer sound. I'm going to hit play, and please let me know if it goes awry.
I've always succeeded in all other aspects of my life. Aside from school. That's always been the one thing that's been kind of my downfall, where I've been an intelligent student, I've been an involved, active, well-known student, but I just had challenge my whole life, challenges memorizing, challenges processing things. It took me twice as long as the person sitting next to me. Math minutes in 3rd and 4th grade were so awful for me, because I could do them, but I couldn't do it in a minute. It'd take me 2 minutes to do it. As a learner, it just took me longer than most people. And it was challenging, because everybody else was succeeding, everybody else was moving on. I think it didn't just shape my educational experience, it shaped me kind of like as a whole, which led into education, because after being told for so many years that I was lazy, I wasn't trying, I really pushed myself to prove everyone else wrong. And I couldn't necessarily do that in school, so I do that in my extracurriculars. I think my learning differences also apply to my life now, because like now I'm on my own, my family's not with me, I don't have anyone to kind of push me in that way, so I have to incorporate all of it together, which has actually been way more efficient for me. I'm not like upset about any of it. That's just how I learn. And that's, what makes me different than other people. And I've like kind of like, I've come to terms with that. Like I think differently than others. And I really like that about myself.
Great. So that story to me is extremely powerful from Matt. I think that and seeing all of these yeses in our chat window about that, the extent to which he reminds them of someone else. It could be someone they're related to. It could be a student that you've had. I think the story certainly is easy to latch on to. And I think that one of the things to me, among many areas of the story that's so interesting to me about Matt, is that when he talked about how a lot of teachers might have presumed that he was lazy. And one of the things I think that often we do is we misattribute student, like their behaviors. Their behaviors can serve as almost like a formative assessment of our teaching sometimes. And so if the kid's head's on the desk, it might not be that they're not motivated. They might already know all the stuff, or they might have had some challenges before school, and it took everything that they had, all the grit in the world, just to get to school that day. So I think part of it is thinking about, well, before you might have some indication that things weren't exactly clicking if maybe a student was clearly tuned out if they had their head in the desk. Now, if you're teaching at a remote distance, what do you use for those indicators, and what does that mean? So for example, if you have Seesaw or some other LMS that you're working with, and a student hasn't logged in, what does that actually say? What does that actually mean? It could mean any number of things. So being careful, being thoughtful about how you attribute certain student behaviors, what do you attribute them to, I think is something to really think about as we move forward. So I am going to move to the next slide, and you can tell me if this works. I think it does. All right, I got a thumbs up. I like thumbs ups. We're going to talk. We can't focus on we have an hour with you, and we can't focus on every single aspect of learning differences because we don't have enough time in the year to do that. So we're going to focus specifically on an area that many of you are familiar with, called executive function. And it really is sort of an umbrella term that encompasses a variety of different characteristics and attributes, such as, or skills, such as impulse control, emotional control, planning and prioritizing, flexibility, working memory, self-monitoring, task initiation, organization, and many, many, many more. One way to think about that is that these are skills. Now, one of the things that I think had misunderstood growing up was that I had the assumption that these were traits, that these were things you either were born with, that you had, or you didn't, and you couldn't really develop them. So I had some trouble organizing myself middle and high school, and I thought, well, that's just the way it is. I'm just not organized. C'est la vie, gotta live with it. And as it turned out, that's not the case. And I've learned through trial and error that there are very, very many strategies out there that can work on. You can develop these skills, and some of which actually work for me. So what a concept that you can actually take some of these things, build on them, even if they aren't necessarily your natural strength. One distinction I think to keep in mind is that, so with older students, you want to work with your whole class on some of these skills. This is the general rule. It's not like there's a specific date at which this changes, but just kind of a general rule to keep in mind. So with younger students, you want to practice for the entire class. With older students, you want to look for students who might be specifically struggling in these areas and target them and work with them. And again, I think one of the things that this is just to emphasize and underscore that when we talk about learning differences, we're talking about a much more inclusive term than students who struggle with specific learning disabilities. So it's broader, and it really does apply to all students. So the concept is we all learn a little bit differently. How do we design learning environments to meet the needs of all of us? And that's obviously no small task, and it is certainly no small task at a remote basis during a pandemic. So let's all recognize that. And I think, again, when I talked about earlier, I referred to the fact that some of these divides and these gaps can unintentionally become exacerbated during a time like this. So we really want to have equity at the forefront of our mind, and thinking about who are the students who might actually struggle more in this remote environment than in a traditional classroom. And that can be for any number of reasons. It can be from having a parent around who you can have, I mean, we have what, 16 million people who have lost their jobs. Imagine a household with one or more parent guardians who all of a sudden there's no income coming in. It's obviously a stressful situation. You might have a parent looking at, or a student looking after another student. So imagine a student who naturally struggles with working memory, having all of that put on top of them at the same time. So it's really important to have that equity focus and have that lens throughout as we think about these strategies and as we think about how we're going to manage our learning environments, how we're going to present them to our students. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Mark, who is going to talk about some student engagement strategies. And we're going to think about, because at first you want to figure out, how do I get my students into this? How do I make sure that I'm not right around them? I can't look them in the eye. I can't fist bump them. I was going to say shake hands, but you probably, who knows when that's coming back, but I can't fist bump or elbow bump them or do something like that. How do I engage them in this learning? How do I engage them in schooling such as it is? So, and I think Mark has some great ideas, and I'll be chiming in as well. So Mark, the floor is yours.
All right. So yes. So what we have is we've outlined a few strategies to look at around how we engage students online and how we not only engage them initially, but keep students engaged and set up conditions to allow all students to be as successful as possible. So Alex, if you can click for me. So the first major area is around integrating choice into instruction, right? So allowing students to express their knowledge in different ways. It's going to be difficult for some students to type a long essay or to record. So the next one says, create alternatives to tools that require students to speak on video, or consider replacing some text assignments with video, right? So for some students, they may have issues speaking on video, right? That may be a difficult thing for them to do. And they would prefer to submit a written response, and you would get a better response from them if it were written. Or some students vice versa, right? Typing that response would be difficult. So allowing them to use a tool like Flipgrid, or to take their phone and record a voice memo and email that to you instead of asking students to type an essay, may be options. And then including multiple types of media in your lesson materials. So we'll talk in a few minutes about creating accessible content, but making sure that you have different types of media available for students. So some video, something that they can read, something that they can interact with potentially, and then making sure that those materials are accessible. So for videos, making sure that they have captions. For accessible content, making sure that they can navigate with a keyboard, or if the students need it available in a different language, that's available to them. So next slide, please. So then this one is around establishing predictability and routine. And as Marianne mentioned earlier, we're not trying to schedule every minute of every day, but for many of our students with learning differences, that sense of routine and normalcy is going to be very important. So while we don't want to schedule every minute of every day, we do want to provide predictable schedules for our synchronous activities. Encourage students to use the timers on their phones, or if you go to Google and you type in timer 5 minutes, it will give you a timer that will count down for them. But use that to encourage that productive block of time, right? You can sit here for 30 minutes, and then encouraging movement and brain breaks, right? So sit for 30 minutes and do your assignment, then get up and walk around and take a lap. And in the classroom, we do that naturally, but how we do that in a remote environment, how we purposefully scaffold students to build these times in. Visual schedules are another great way, especially for our younger students, having these visual schedules. Again, we're not trying to schedule students down to the minute, but having these visual schedules for blocks of time, right? In the morning, you can do this, and midday, you can do this, and in the afternoon, you can do that. Establishing schedules of due dates for assignments, and make sure that students have all the information that they need up front, right? One of the things that when I first started teaching online, one of the things that I would do is I would offhandedly mention a due date in a Zoom session or whatever we were using back then. I don't even know, cups and a long string. Um, and I would forget to write it down or follow that up with an email. So people would forget and they would naturally, they wouldn't catch that. So giving that schedule, and to the extent that you can make it predictable, and making sure that students know. So the next one says, providing written follow-ups of all assignments, right? So students should walk out of a synchronous meeting if you have them scheduled, and they should know everything that's expected of them, and it should be documented and the links to where they can find it, so that there's not a lot of mystery around where to go for assignments, when to submit them, where to submit them. Setting these clear user-friendly expectations. And then to the extent that it's possible, to establish school-wide or team-wide norms, so that if students, especially in high school, have multiple teachers, that there's some semblance of consistency from classroom to classroom with respect to where assignments are, how they get submitted. Next slide. So the next thing is simply to be available, right? So you may have some students, you may have your synchronous meetings, but some may need some more routine check-ins. How are we going to be able to provide, especially for students who need that formative feedback? How are we going to provide more interim and formative feedback as they go along, to provide them that feedback to help them grow and help them develop their work? Again, providing feedback and reinforcement, making sure to tell students, good job, or, thank you for doing this, or thank you for being here. And then I tell teachers who teach in online courses, you can never communicate too much, right? There's no such thing as over communicating in online classes, right? So to the extent that you're sending out frequent emails or frequent messages outlining what students should be working on, what's expected, if there are questions that come up, that you're clarifying them, but making sure to do those as frequently as possible. And then the last area that we'll talk about before I turn it back to Alex is to use your resources, right? So many of our students have OT, PT, speech, vision, and hearing services. Some districts are providing teletherapy, some districts are not. But regardless, in most districts, those resources are still available to you to tap into. If you're having issues that they can be helpful with, reach out to them and ask them for their support, either to reach out to the family and make a phone call, or to provide you with some background for that student that would be helpful. And then students with students with learning differences all need individualized supports, right? So we still have the individualized supports that we provide students when they were in our classrooms. We still need to provide something that looks like that for those students when they're at home. So how we do that is a team effort, and how we continue to leverage our team to continue to support students while we're at home is critical. Alex?
Thank you, Mark. Those are really helpful and some very practical strategies that we can all. I think these are things that while they're obviously helpful in a remote context during a pandemic, they're helpful in a regular context too. So it's very helpful. I wanted to go through and I talked about the definition of executive function as being sort of this all-encompassing term that include, or not all-encompassing, but an umbrella term that includes a variety of different skills. And I wanted to go through a few of those skills and provide a strategy that you can use to work on those skills with your students. And the strategy is intended to work both digitally and non-digitally. So if you have students who might have challenges with internet access or access to a device, these should be effective in either context. You should be able to repurpose them both ways. So the first one I want to talk about is impulse control. That's a challenge for many of our students, many of our adults. copying to that here. And one strategy that I use and I think is effective for many others is this idea of, it's called the Pomodoro method. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, and you can pick any increments of time, but typically the default time setting is you work for about 25 minutes and you break for 5. So I think the distinction here is that you're not thinking about it in terms of I'm going to get started at a particular time. You are getting started, and then the time's going to tick away, and then you have a break coming after 20 minutes or 15 minutes. So again, you can set it to any time increments. Maybe you want, as a teacher, you want to set up some rewards or incentives for having a streak, to keep a streak going. That's another kind of little game you can have with your class. There are a few different tool options if your students have access to devices and access to the web. There's a browser-based tool called Tomato Timer, and these links and everything are all going to be available to you after. So don't feel that you need to furiously write them down or note them down right now. There's an app called Forest, which that's also useful for impulse control insofar as you put it on your device and your forest grows in this app, as long as you don't check check a Twitter feed or check something else during that particular time period. So that's something, again, that facilitates impulse control. And then Stay Focused is an add-on for Chrome that uses that same concept of the Pomodoro method. So these are some, again, I think some strategies to keep you on task, and because the psychology is that a break's coming, it's getting there and it's getting closer. I can keep at it for X number of minutes more and I'll be able to get there. The name of the one with the forest is actually literally called Forest. So you'll see the first bullet under that second set of the tools for both impulse control and task initiation. That Forest has a link to the iPhone and the Android versions, and you'll have access to that. So the next one is emotional control, and I think this is something that I know, again, that all students could benefit from for sure, particularly, again, some of our students who have experienced learning differences in a more visceral way than others. So I think the idea of emotion journaling is pretty interesting. So like, imagine at the beginning of the day, you have your students write an entry about how they're feeling. Could be good, could be bad, could be indifferent. But then part of it is that they're focusing on identifying those strategies that can help them maintain their feeling if it's good, or modify it if it's not so good. So they're identifying, so and this also is where there's this blend between learning differences and social and emotional learning, because you're talking here about strategies like being aware of what you're feeling and then knowing how to act based on that awareness. So if to maintain that feeling or to modify it, I have to identify some strategies, right? And then finally they write an entry at the end of the day. Again, could be digital, could be not, to reflect on, did the strategies work? So if I identified a strategy to keep feeling good, do I still feel good? If I identify a strategy to modify it, if I was feeling not so great, do I feel better now? And they can write any subsequent relevant details that inform or make sense in the context of whether there was a reason why an intervening factor came into play that would have impacted whether they use a strategy or not. They wouldn't have been able to do it. So that's another thing you can obviously add on. Another again, one of those skills that's associated with executive function is planning and prioritizing. So Mark alluded to this before. He referenced the notion of a daily scheduler. But one of the ways that you can have students do it, again, either digitally or not, is they can create a digital or physical representation of their schedule. Again, as Mark said, flexible, loose. We're not talking to the minute. And you can create maybe some sort of template, again, a loose, broad template that they can fill in and create themselves. And imagine making sort of a game out of it, that students can get a point for each hour time block that they adhere to their schedule. And if they can't adhere to it, they note why. And maybe they get that point also if they note why. So for example, if they had to, all of a sudden, their younger sister was sick and they had to care for their younger sister during that 2-hour time block, and if they put that as their reason, they should get those points, right? There's no reason that they shouldn't. There wasn't of no fault of their own why they couldn't adhere to the schedule they had planned at the beginning of the day. So again, they can get that. You can get a point back, and they can identify. Either they can acknowledge what happened, or they can say what they would do differently the next time. Because clearly, if the students are able to recognize that there was a reason why they weren't able to do what they needed to do, and they're able to have develop and create and recognize and write down a strategy that will change things the next time, they should probably get a point back. So you can imagine, again, you can play around with it, do whatever strategy or structure works the best for you. But then imagine the student with the most points in the class could quote unquote win the week. And you can make it competitive, you can make it not, whatever you want to do. And if it's not about a winner, then again, this is completely, I see what Kristen says about the notion of these are again more broad suggestions that you don't have to implement it with a particular winner. If you get a sense that your students are going to maybe feel as though if those who didn't win are going to feel like they're left out, or if they're, if they tried their best and they still get no reward, then they won't win. The win is meant in a very loose term. Like everyone can be a winner. It doesn't necessarily have to be, a sort of Game of Thrones type situation. So you can really set it up so that everyone feels empowered by the idea. And finally, the working memory is again another strategy, or I should say another skill that we associate with executive function. And one way to think about it and sometimes it can be challenging. How do I really foster and facilitate working memory at a distance? And one way you can potentially do that is this idea of a mnemonic of the week. So students could potentially nominate mnemonics about a topic that's being talked about in class that week. And what is a mnemonic to help people remember a particular key idea or ideas from that week? And then students could vote and they could see the one that was really, really helpful to them. So they could use that one, they could think of one on their own. But it's the idea of, the point is that this process is going to help them, just the thinking it through this process, even if they don't come up with a mnemonic that they find themselves particularly great, just that idea of working on it is going to help build and support their working memory. So that to me is something that's really, really vital. And it's also, and again, as Marianne wrote in the chat, it's a model of how you can support students' working memory. So those are just some strategies that again can be used online, they can be used offline. You can build in, if you feel like healthy competitions are great for your class, you can make it into a point structure and you get a big winner. If they're not, if you feel like you want to just support if everyone wants to be a winner, or if you want to not even have winners, if you you don't need a scoreboard, that's completely fine too. It's just the general idea in each of these cases is figuring out, how can I support my students' executive function skills, particularly those who have challenges in these areas, and how can I do it at a distance? And how can I really think about those kids who might not have access to devices, high-speed internet, or support to use those tools? So with that, I'm going to throw it back to Mark, who's going to talk about, Mark does a lot of, I don't want to say a lot, all of our technical work. He does a lot of it. He's our technical lead, and he does a lot of thinking around how do we make sure that our design, when we put stuff up, actually is designed for everyone and isn't just designed for those of us who might not be on the autism spectrum, or have dyslexia, or have other learning challenges. So Mark, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I just put the full list of these in the chat, but these are some examples, and we're going to dig a lot more into accessible content in our part 2 session, which is next week, I believe. But for a few things right now to just think about, right? So when you're thinking about designing content for students with learning differences, these are two groups of students that you can think about. There's a full list, and again, I put that link in the chat. But for example, for students with autism, writing things in plain English instead of using figures of speech and idioms, right? Using simple sentence with bullets and descriptive buttons. For students with dyslexia, using graphs and images to support text, keep your text left justified, having your text able to be read aloud. Let students change the contrast. If you have a website that can let students change the contrast between the apps, between the foreground and the background. I'm going to share my screen for a moment as we go to the next slide, Alex, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I want to show you this tool called Grackle Docs, which is a tool that lets you check your Google Docs for accessibility. So in Google Docs, once you install the Grackle Docs add-on, you can go to your add-ons menu, go to Grackle Docs, and launch.
Mark, I'm afraid we might have lost your audio. Can you
Yeah,
try again?
I got muted. How much did you hear?
We just saw that you can go here. So I think we might want to start again with this, but we can all see the page. So that's good.
All right, so once you go to the Grackle Docs, you can go to the Grackle Docs, to the add-ons menu, go to Grackle Docs and launch it. And then it will check your document to make sure that it is accessible to all students. And it will give you tools and suggestions for how to fix it. Another thing in Google Docs, since many districts are using Google Docs, but Office 365 has the same feature, it's just in a different place. If you go to the tools menu, there's an option to do voice typing. I'm gonna stop my sharing, where you can type by using your voice. It won't work while I'm on Zoom. If you go to the tools menu and you can see voice typing, and you can actually speak, and then Google Docs will dictate to text, and it's gotten so much better. Marianne's right. The other thing in Google Docs is there's an accessibility menu, and it will read your document out loud if you want to as well, if you go to the accessibility menu in your Google Docs. Go ahead to the next slide. So the accessibility menu, voice typing and read aloud. And then next slide. So here, this will be available in the PDF. These are a few other tools, some accessible tools for math, some tools for reading online in sites that are not Google Doc, and then some additional educational materials. And I think we're going to cover a lot of these in depth in the session next week as well.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. And I think one of the things as we go through this, and I mean, we mentioned to you early on, we're really talking broadly about learning differences, but obviously also trying to reference specific supports for students with identified learning disabilities. And so today really has kind of a broad swath of different things you can do, but one thing that we know is right now, more and more students are needing supports because you're not there face to face, right, to kind of nudge or support or provide the visual when they need it, or that reminder. And so really trying to think through that. So as we kind of, as we were thinking about today, we know that again and again, this idea around how we connect with our families and our students is so important. And I loved how so many of you were putting ideas in the chat about the importance of focusing on strengths. And so right now, I think parents and families are struggling with, okay, how do I keep this going? How do I support my students? It's a great time to remind them of the strengths of their children and the strengths of the children in their homes. And also, how do we use the students' strengths to then also support and address their weaknesses? And so one of the things that we know through all of this is the importance of connecting with our students. And many of you have referenced how you're doing that in different ways. But we find that someone said, like, when you started to communicate more. And I think that is just the truth. I'm watching my own children try and do this. And the more they're in touch with their teachers, their school, and also each other, I think the stronger it really is. And so make sure that you are reaching out to all students. We shared a couple ideas about schedules. We don't want to say there's one schedule, but some families don't necessarily know how to create that schedule, and some students really don't, and we need to assume there isn't a lot of guidance. And so how do we give a couple of different ideas? This is what you might want to do. Can we provide some casual meeting times where students get together and just share how they're doing? Even the emoji or the movie that we asked at the beginning, could you ask students, how are they feeling, right? So Alex referenced some of that for emotional control, but also for building community, right? How are you feeling? What would you do? And so, we need to really be thinking about how are we connecting with students, because school is the hub of so many of our communities, and it's the main place for so many of our students. The other thing is how can we support the family unit? So can we recommend that they work with their siblings, or they do something kind for each other, or what they're celebrating? And the thing I know we referenced early about flexibility and grace, but we need to make sure that we remember that we might need more time for assignments. They might be trying hard they might just have a hard time getting to a place where they can sit down and do work. And so how can we be flexible? But then when they are putting in effort, how can we provide some feedback? Something our team's been thinking a lot about is you might not be able to provide feedback on everything they do the way you might in a classroom just by a lot of informal structures, but make sure that for some of the select work, you are providing feedback and helping them know. And this certainly can be verbal. It doesn't all have to be in writing, and it can be even by phone. And it can look a lot of different ways. And so again, how can you make sure that you're connecting with your students on a regular basis? The other thing is a colleague of ours, Jimmy Casa, shared this quote recently, which is students who were struggling in school before are still struggling, and those who are doing well may now be struggling too. And this really spoke to us, I think, especially as we think of students around that are struggling with executive function and other things. And so when we look at this, we're trying to think through what can we do? And we know that we want to support students directly, but for students who have families that are engaging or who are willing to engage or trying to understand what to do, we also want to provide them with some supports. And so one of the things that we've done a lot of thinking about is mindfulness, which is our next slide. And the reason we bring that up is I love the brain breaks and all of that. We've talked about the emotional control aspects. But for a lot of our kids, it is not great to be home right now, right? And we've heard from a lot of teachers just how much they're worried about kids in the homes and where they are right now. And so one thing you can do as an educator who's either supporting other teachers or working directly with students is, can you help a student and talk with the student into like helping them acknowledge how they're feeling? And can we name how they're feeling, right? So it can be through small groups, it can be through one-on-one discussions, it can be through activities, but how can we do that? And then also, are we helping them manage some of that? So if one of the things is that there's a lot of chaos in their home, or they don't really know, can we help them say, well, can you go somewhere for 30 minutes and sit down and do this work? Or can you tell everybody this is the time you're going to do your schoolwork? Or what is that? So we don't want them just avoiding what they're trying to do, but also can we kind of help them process that and really show what's possible? And I love this reminder of keeping it simple, because we cannot be throwing all these new things. We need to really help and think through what are these few things we need to do, and how do we really support our students in doing that really well. We did have a few recommendations as well for supporting caregivers. A colleague of mine was sharing how a teacher held a meeting with her and her son who has an IEP, and they just talked through, how are things going? What does it look like? And the importance of that was just such a big deal for them as a family and for their child. Their child felt really special that they had that joint conference. And I think for many of you, as you're reaching out, you know, we do want to remember that sometimes you're not going to hear back. Sometimes you're not going to get the response you want to get. Sometimes people aren't jumping in to participate, but that persistence, if that student knows you're trying, actually goes a really long way. And I know that once you get to speak with caregivers, you really can do a great deal. The other thing to remember is you all are experts at working with students with learning differences and learning disabilities, but a lot of our caregivers are not, right? Or they've struggled for a long time and they're grateful that the school and you are helping their child. And so are there videos you can suggest? Are there graphic organizers? Even the, you know, some of the different tools we talked about today can go a really long way. I also think caregivers love to hear about what's great about their kids. And so when you can really focus on those strengths and how you help that child use those strengths, that can really give a sense of pride to caregivers that they can then carry through as well. A couple more ideas we just wanted to share are that, you know, right now, yes, we want to be focused on academic, but we also want to support our students. We've done a lot of talking that connects with social and emotional learning, executive function skills. What other life skills? So if students are gardening or they're helping cooking, or can they, you know, share some of the things they've helped cook, or whatever that looks like, that's all great too. And so kind of honoring all of that. And giving family that alleviating pressure and saying, it's okay if you don't get to everything today, you know, and how you can take care of them. And then a thing that's so important is a lot of you were chiming in about how important it is to give feedback for students, but it's also important to ask families and students, is this working? What isn't working right now? Because some families really don't speak up. They want to do what the teacher says and they want to do what the school says. And so by asking them, you might really learn how to better support the student in this new setting, even though you know so well what to do when that student is in the classroom. And so we really do encourage you, to go ahead and do those things. And so obviously we could probably spend all day with you talking about these things, but we just wanted to mention a few more things before we go, which is, right, that like things like executive function can be taught. So on the next slide, Alex, I think, that's something that while you're not even with that student, some of these timer tabs and Forest and other apps and graphic organizers and all those things, you're actually developing really important skills that will support those students when they're back in the classroom with you. Also supporting weaknesses with strengths. I think we're preaching to the choir on this call, but really appreciating that. And of course, prioritizing your most vulnerable students and ensuring they don't feel alone. The work that you all do, the motivations you already shared clearly go to that, but they might need something different. They might need something more. And it might take a lot more work to make that connection, but I know that's something you all are doing. Just know that you're not alone, that lots of us are trying to do that and figure that out and wanting to make sure. And so, I love this reminder from, I think it's Janae, which is, we can't overwhelm them, do all these things, because then they will shut down if they're not feeling good about it and how they're supporting their kids. So how do we keep it simple, make sure expectations are clear but flexible, and then we're honoring and celebrating that as we go. And yes, adding our life skills is also so important. So checklist you can use. I just see some great pieces being added here in the Zoom that you all can implement maybe even tomorrow. So I really appreciate all of that. So as we're getting ready to wrap up, we want to remind you that you can access the slides, the recordings, and all the links that we shared today at this site, go.ncsu.edu/remote learning. And we certainly hope you'll come back. We'll dig in even further. Next week we'll offer a second part of this, and Brittany just added that link to the chat. So those of you that want to make sure you have that, we certainly appreciate that. And the other thing we want to make sure that you're aware of is that there's coaching support that the Department of Public Instruction is providing. Also, some of the faculty at NC State is jumping in. And so right after, there is coaching support that will be offered. And I think it's today that it's being offered from 2 to 3. I think there's a little, but you can go right there and register. And then Mark is also adding links about the coaching support. And then also that site we just shared with you, the go.ncsu, does give you an option to see when the next sessions are being held. And so last but not least, we did want to let you know that the Friday Institute is open their course, the Social Emotional Learning course. We've had a tremendous response. We're keeping it open all summer for those of you that want to dive in with us. It's free, it's flexible, and there are PLC guides if you're leading and you want to have your PLC come together around that. And then I know that many of you are eager to also make sure you get your certificate. And so Mark is about to put out a whole list of links, but we really would appreciate it if you would go ahead and complete the survey. We always make changes. We have a meeting scheduled tomorrow to adjust and build. And then on top of that, it is that survey that prompts the creation of a certificate for you. And so Mark just put that in, bit.ly, it is case sensitive remote LD survey. So we really hope you'll complete that. We will certainly go through it. And on behalf of all of us, we are really appreciative that you're with us today. We thank you for what you're doing every single day. I know you are working so hard to try and do all this, and We look forward to hearing from you and hopefully seeing you again in some of the other sessions that are being offered.
And thank you all. We really sincerely do appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Take care of yourselves.